Whoever ain't riding with, man, is riding against, man. Remember that.
What were your thoughts going into Blue Story? I think the movie aimed to try and educate people in terms of why these things happen. I think they could have done a better job of...
Okay, so hello, and welcome to Lights Camera Podcast, the podcast where we talk about your favourite movies. So today we are going to be talking about a movie called Blue Story. But before we get into that, I think if you have listened to our last podcast episode, you'll know that Zayn has started his GP placement, which we're all very excited to find out how he's found it so far. So Zayn, do you mind enlightening us on what has happened so far?
I can do. I didn't realise this was such a big deal now. So after 1 week, it has even less than a week actually, about 5 days. It's been good. It's been going well. I am having the opportunity to speak to patients on my own, which is always a useful thing to do. Practicing those OSCE skills. And the GPs, everyone's been really nice. Everyone's been really helpful. So yeah, I've been enjoying it. The only issue is, and it's a big issue for me, is where the placement is quite far away from where I live.
Yeah.
So it's quite a long commute. It's about 2 hours there and 2 hours back. So a lot of my day is just spent sitting on a train /bus/overground.
Have you found any kind of way to make the time pass? Is there anything that you do, or?
In the mornings I usually sleep.
Yeah.
That's a good way to pass the time. And then I read as well.
Oh, what you were reading?
So at the moment, I started rereading. I got about halfway through it and then I stopped. Slaughterhouse 5.
Oh yeah, you mentioned. Yeah.
And so I'm picking that back up again. We kind of talked about it already, but it's a difficult book to get into, kind of, just because it's quite. It's not like a linear story.
Yeah.
It will go one direction for like half a chapter, and then it will suddenly just diverge another way, and then go on another like tangent, and then go back and forth. But
yeah,
it keeps you engaged, I guess.
Okay.
As a
Well,
reader.
I suppose I suppose those long commutes will essentially force you to read it at least.
Yeah, definitely. What about you? Are you reading anything?
Yeah. So I've been reading something called it's called School of Life, an emotional education, which is really good. It's very interesting. It just kind of talks about more about kind of, I suppose it falls under the category of self-help, but it's just quite interesting in how it talks about, for example, our interactions with other people, how to kind of understand more about how other people think, how to just interact better with people, how to be more kind of thoughtful, and more gives kind of a philosophical take on it as well. I found it really interesting, and I definitely am trying to kind of practice on some of those things.
Okay, interesting. How does it compare to something that I guess is another self-help book that you've read, which was 12 Rules of Life? Is it similar or different to that?
I think 12 Rules of Life is a lot more about one's kind of personal struggle with, perhaps it's much more about being disciplined. So because Jordan Peterson's his quote is like from like chaos to simplicity or something like that. I can't exactly remember. So it's a lot more about living a more disciplined life, whereas this book is a lot more about, I think, being more understanding of other people and living beyond yourself, so to speak. I think it's a lot more about being a better person towards other people, if that makes sense.
So conscientiousness towards others.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of saying it.
Do you
Improve your
recommend
relations. I would recommend it. I think not obviously I don't agree with everything in the book, but I think it was a very good read. So that would be my recommendation for.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I might pick it up, or I might just borrow a few one day.
Yeah, definitely. You'd be welcome to.
Yeah. But yeah, and how's anything else interesting going on in your life?
Not really, other than had obviously SJT today, which is our like medical school exam, but I think that was all right. Again, can't really tell how it went, but we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll see when I end up in Isle of Man. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. But anyway, I guess to the topic at hand. So we watched last week, I believe it was. We watched a movie called Blue Story. Blue Story is a movie centered around two best friends, Timmy and Marco, who go to school together, and their friendship is essentially basically destroyed by the influence of postcode based gangs, and they soon become rivals, with the aim of actually trying to kill each other. And Marco is the first to fall under the influence of the gangs by his older brother, who is the leader of is it the Peckham gang, I think?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Meanwhile, whilst this is going on, Timmy remains off the streets, and he ends up forming a relationship with one of his classmates, Leah. But this is quite short-lived, because due to the rivalry that Marco and Timmy have, Leah ends up being killed as she gets between them. And her death causes Timmy to then join the rival gang, and he aims to get revenge on Marco. But in the end, their bitter rivalry kind of causes a lot of collateral damage, with Marco's older brother becoming paralyzed by Timmy. And then in the end, Timmy faces the same fate as his girlfriend and is killed by Marco. And Marco isn't necessarily a winner in this, because even he then ends up serving life sentence in prison because of the things that he's done. So that's kind of, I guess, a general synopsis of the movie. Would you say that's quite?
Yeah, I think that's very
a
good.
few
synopsis.
sentences how you'd say what the plot of the movie is.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts going into Blue Story?
I was quite excited. I would say I was excited because it's definitely a story or movie that is very it's not a common thing to see. It's on quite like a raw topic, and it's very raw because it's, it's both got political connotations to it, and it's also got very like strong emotional connotation, especially for people who are, for example, from London and even outside of London. It's something that affects a lot of people. So I was quite excited to go in and see what happened, and also, of course, the controversy around it with there being fights or what have you in Birmingham, and I think in Nottingham as well. So they're leading to basically to ban screening off the movie. I think what I was hoping for was a deeper understanding of the kind of lives and the environment that these people are growing up in. What about you?
Well, firstly, do you feel that after watching the movie that you achieved that, this greater understanding?
I would say so. I think the movie did show the environment very well, and it was something that I feel like, something you've mentioned before, when you feel like you can be absorbed into the environment and it feels real. And I think that they did it very well. I think it all seemed very realistic, and also very kind of powerful in the way that they showed it. So what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I also was quite interested, I'd say, is the word I used, to see this film, to see what direction it takes and how they go about telling this story. Mainly because it is something that, I guess for us, is quite close to home, in that it's dealing with gang culture in London, the city where we live. And there's I was trying to think of other movies or just the other media in general that have dealt with this kind of topic. Only things that came to mind were Top Boy, which is a television series back from 2011, and now it's been restarted on Netflix. And I guess in terms of movies, maybe things like Kidulthood and Adulthood, which are way back, movies that were made quite a while ago now, when we were, I guess, in school. But this deals with it in a different way. I guess it's dealing with a different topic. It's a lot more direct, at least in its commentary on gang culture. And yeah, I mean, it's something, like you said, it's something that is influenced by politics and influences politics as well. It's the arms of, I guess, gang culture is quite far-reaching. So I guess it would affect us in that way, and also the fact that we're soon to be healthcare professionals. It's something that is going to affect our work. If we're working in an emergency department, you'll probably see patients coming in who are the victims of knife crime and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I was interested to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think that's, you definitely hit the nail on the head there, especially about the the university and hospital that we're mostly at, I think because you haven't had your A&E placement yet, but there's definitely a lot of that, coming into the A&E on a daily basis and in resus and what have you. So I would agree. I think another thing is there's another kind of series which does link to it, which is I think called Shiro's Story.
Yeah.
I think it was a YouTube series. I haven't watched either Top Boy, Adulthood, or Shiro's Story. So I think, in a way, I have nothing to compare this movie to. But I suppose then it gives me maybe and you have you seen those movies?
I've seen the movies Adulthood, and I've watched the newest season of Top Boy, which is on Netflix, but I haven't seen Shiro's Story. And Shiro's Story is actually directed and created by the creator of this movie.
Yeah.
So I guess I think that's the most directly related.
Yeah. So I'd be interested to actually find out about how this movie compares to those other movies. But just before that, I'd ask, what was your overall impression of the movie? What did you feel coming out of the movie? And has it changed?
I think, because I think when we first came out, you asked me this as well, or someone, because we went with a group of friends, and the question came up is, does this change your views on any way? I don't know if it changed my views on anything in terms of I was aware of gang culture going into it, and I'm not a supporter, and I'm aware of the really devastating effects that it can have. But I guess it did just. I think the movie aimed to try and educate people in terms of why these things happen, and how people can fall into these situations. Because often, a lot of the time, depending on your news outlet, you might find that the story is like, these like thugs and just these criminals, but it goes a lot further than that. And I think the story that the movie tells, is of just people who've fallen into this life through negative influence around them and through things that are, I guess, out of their control. I mean, not that is that they're blameless in the situation, but the story is, or the greater picture is more than what you see just from the news or whatever. And I think it did a good job of educating people in that regard.
Yeah, I think it was, because even seeing the people who came to the cinema, it was a real wide mix. There was, there were people who, like, I don't want to be stereotyping anyone, but there was like more kind of, the young laddish type people in like hoodies and, I suppose the type of people in the media shown who would go and watch these movies, but there were also, a lot of more what appeared to be more like middle class people going into the movie, and it was really nice to see a wide range of people, watching the movie. What I would also say is, what is it that you think that the movie did well? What did you enjoy in particular from the movie?
I thought the pacing was done very well. So I think the first half did a really good job of establishing these characters to a point where you are vested into their story. Obviously, especially the two main characters of Marco and Timmy. I did feel it was a bit jarring at first to see these, because they're basically two adults playing the roles of high school children, I guess, which isn't uncommon in a lot of movies, but it was a bit jarring at first. But as the movie progressed and as the story takes you out away from the school and more towards the streets, it's more fitting, I guess, and it becomes less distracting. But yeah, the first half did a good job, I think, of establishing them in more so in terms of you believing their relationship, and then you therefore care when it's broken. I think they could have done a better job of showing you these characters in more detail in terms of things like what do they aspire to be, what are their goals? Because because for example, they do that with Timmy's girlfriend, Leah. That she wants to, or that she could potentially be a singer when she's older. Yeah. So then when we've already spoiled it, but when she dies, it has a bit more of an emotional impact than if that wasn't established. Yeah. Because you realise what that loss means. So if that was done for Marco and Timmy, I think that would have had that would have been to the betterment of the movie. But what they do establish really well is the differences that they have in terms of what they value from relationships and from the people around them and their character, their personalities. That really came across by the actors and by the writing really well.
Yeah, I totally agree. They really, I mean, even right from the start, in the playground, and Timmy does Marco's homework for him, and you can really tell, again, for example, at the party, how Timmy is very different in the way that he sees the world and his ambition. Maybe not ambition, but just like his worldview is very different to his friends. In that, you can tell he's a bit more sensitive type. He's not so much of like the laddie type, guy. And I think, what would have really enhanced that would have been a bit more on, like you said, a bit more on what he wanted to do, maybe a bit more on how he's doing in school. There was never any indication, for example. Maybe that's trying to make it a bit too cliche, I don't know, but I think, like you said, it would have made it more profound when, he did die in the end.
What did you think about the narration, I guess you could call it, from Rapman throughout the movie?
Initially, I was unsure about it because it's something very, very different.
Yeah.
You really, and it's something which you're not used to in cinema, because essentially it's kind of, breaking down that wall where, Rapman is now talking to the audience about what's going on. And initially I was a bit unsure, but actually as the movie went on, I thought it was quite nice. I quite liked it because I felt like it felt very organic because, Rapman, he's actually also from this background. He, the movie's basically based largely upon his own experiences, which he said. And to have him, rapping about it, I think using that medium of, rap, which is, associated with, the gang culture as well, but being used in a way which was very moving. I thought it worked really, really well. And even the lyrics were really nice and quite poignant. So I think it actually fitted really well. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think at first it was a bit jarring to see, as you said, it because it's so different. I haven't really seen anything like that in a movie, at least. I did like it in the sense that it felt very kind of folklorish.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I mean? Because he basically raps what has happened in the story up to that point.
Yeah.
So it's like modern folklore type thing.
Yeah.
But I do think each time it happened, it did take me a little bit out of the movie, just because it's basically just reviewing what we've seen up till then. And so in that sense, it's just kind of going over it, but not packing the same emotional punches when you first saw it.
Yeah.
Because it usually happens at quite, critical points in the film when there's a big turning point or something quite significant has happened.
Yeah.
And it just felt a bit unnecessary revisiting it and just summarizing it. But I guess it's his style, because I think it's kind of how Shiro's story was done as well. And it's unique and creative, to say the least. So if it, just because it didn't work necessarily for me, I guess it's not all bad,
Yeah. I think that, I don't know, I suppose the movie was made on quite a low budget, actually. I think it was made on about $1 million. Well, obviously not really low.
In terms of movie, that's really low.
Yeah, it's very low. And I overheard someone today, they were like, oh man, I prefer Top Boy, it's much more high budget. And I was just a bit like, it's like, you can't compare movies based on that. Like, and because again, it's a movie where, in terms of its technicalities, like, how we just literally reviewed the last movie we reviewed, which was Doctor Sleep, about how things like the camera angles, the lighting, this type of thing, the score, it's much more expected in those types of movies. In this movie, this cutscenes, the angles, whatever, was far less prominent, but instead it was based more on the relationship of the audience to the characters and relating strongly to them. And I think overall the movie did achieve that.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, though, I would agree. I went on a massive tangent there, but yeah, I would agree that sometimes it could take you out a little bit. Another thing I would say, which I didn't like, was basically I'm never a fan of things which I feel are shoved into a movie. And usually the most common thing for me is love and like sex scenes, basically.
Yeah.
And I really felt it was kind of that. Perhaps it makes me sound a bit, too what's it called, prudent or what have you. But I do think that that scene in the movie, I didn't really feel it added very much. I think it could have been done in a better way, rather than I get the comparison and what have you. But I just felt like it was way too drawn out, and I think what would have been nicer.
It went on way too long.
It went on way too long,
was
and
just
I
getting
actually felt uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And I think you can show someone's bond, and actually movies which show bonds between characters without having to, show physical affection. Those are movies which are really, really good. I think that's, or not necessarily, but
No, I agree.
think
There's a name of a movie I'm trying to think of that does that really well. I think it's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Have you seen that?
No.
No, it's a really, really good movie, and the whole theme of the movie is about the relationship between two characters, but it's done mainly just through dialogue and seeing the characters interact and the acting, rather than relying on that. But you really, really get a sense of the connection between the characters.
Yeah, totally. It's like we just watched. You can compare it with so many movies, even like movies between like two guys, for example. Like in this what's called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
You don't need to include like signs of physical affection or even verbal affection in order to tell that bond. And I think the movie relied on having this scene, I think, basically to kind of build it up so that when she died, rather than investing a bit more time, I think, because it did feel a bit rushed. Plus, the girl was a bit annoying. But
also, they're going to be like high school children.
Yeah.
So it was just very strange to watch.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I
I
yeah.
agree that was definitely not my top positive of the movie. But you mentioned that this movie didn't go crazy with like camera angles and cinematography and stuff. I would say that's probably my second complaint as well of the movie, in that the cinematography was quite flat.
Yeah.
But I get your point that it's not the priority. But yeah, comparing it to something like Top Boy, which is filmed so it's got such a like signature to the way it's filmed, it does add another level of something to appreciate.
Yeah.
But obviously this is Ratman's first, I guess, feature film debut, so it's understandable that the cinematography wasn't amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Due to time restraints, what would be your kind of final thoughts away from the movie?
So I think this is quite an important movie for the time we're at now, especially with the general election around the corner, because it is obviously, like we mentioned, quite a politically driven issue that this country, and it's more so the city, is currently facing. So telling a story in this way is in such a powerful story with quite a very clear message is quite important, I think, and necessary.
I think you said it better than I could, really. I think it's a shame of the kind of move. There's obviously been a big move to kind of, what I feel is basically censor the movie. And I think it's always very dangerous when you want to try censor, just when you want to censor in general. Do you see what I mean? It's a very, very topical movie, like you said. And I think one thing it really reminded me of is watching one time in Question Time, when they were talking about knife crime, and some guy was like, oh yeah, these kids, they're like so evil, you just need to lock them up or whatever. And this movie is, I think, especially aimed at people like that, for example. It's aimed for everyone, of course, and everyone can take away, I think, a message from it. But I think it's really to highlight how, people's circumstances can really determine their kind of life outcomes. Because one thing I think, like I mentioned, why I like the environment of the movie as my kind of final point is there was no escape from it. You see how, every time they go out, even really in the beginning, people ask Timmy like, oh, there's
So
scenes
true.
where it crops up. So there's no escape from it. And I think it's something which, like you said, it highlights these people's lives that actually they're not really evil, but actually there clearly needs to be some kind of change.
Because for the whole first half of the movie, neither Timmy nor Marco are involved in the gangs.
Yeah.
It's just through the things that happen to them. That's the route through how they try to deal with those issues.
Yeah.
It's what's available to them. Whereas if there was an alternative, I'm sure they would probably take it up.
Yeah.
There just isn't.
Yeah. So yeah.
So
do
how
you
would...
wanna, sorry, no.
I was just
I was
going to
gonna
say, so how would you rate this movie out of 10?
So again, just as a reminder that I don't have any other similar movie to compare it to. So but I really liked the movie. I left feeling good about it. I still feel good about it. There were a few obviously issues with some of the scenes and some of the cringiness, but overall I would give this movie probably maybe a 6.9, 7 out of 10.
Okay.
Probably not a 7. Let's say 6.8.
Are we going to do 0.8, 0.7? I
Uh,
know I did 0.5 last time. But
okay. I'll say
you can.
I'll say a close 7.
Close 7.
Maybe
okay,
like
fine.
by the skin of its teeth. What about yourself?
As long as we keep it to one decimal place.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not doing 0.592. So for me, because I'm trying to see this as objectively just as a movie, although it's so heavily influenced by a social topic. I'm trying to just view it as a standalone thing.
Okay.
And on that basis, I think I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an enjoyable watch for one time. I think it has just a very clear, very straightforward story. There's not many, reasons necessarily to go back and watch it like in the similar way to Doctor Sleep.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to watch it with someone, like you said, who you think maybe this is a movie they need to watch. Educationally, really. But besides that, there's personally, I think, although it's necessary, I think, for this movie to be really straightforward and flat out with the message, I am often a fan of subtlety in movies. This movie wasn't very subtle in its messaging. For example, something like Get Out is quite subtle in the messages that it has.
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
Quite layered, and I really like that. That's why I love that movie. So that's just a personal preference, really. So for that reason, I think it's going to be a 6 out of 10.
Okay, I think that's fair. So fantastic. Do you want to sign us off then?
Well, it's your turn, mate.
Is it?
Yeah, I did it last time.
Oh, okay. I'll sign us off. Okay, so thank you very much for watching this episode of Lights Camera Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. So please like and subscribe and give us any suggestions in the comments. What any movies you think that we should watch. So thank you very much and goodbye.